everybody, welcome to Board Online, Board Offline. Today we're going to teach you how to play the Duet Mode of Wingspan Asia. Now this is the third expansion for Wingspan. Everything you see in this video will be from this expansion. You won't see anything from the original base game because you can play either solo or Duet Mode using only this expansion. Now I won't be covering the solo rules in this video. I will be covering the Duet Mode rules, meaning the two-player rules for Wingspan Asia. So if that is what you're here for, you are in the right place. Also, I do want to mention this has 6 and 7 player flock mode rules, which I won't be covering in this video either. To begin setup, first shuffle the deck of bird cards and then place them in the play area. Then flip 3 cards onto the tray. Place all the food tokens within easy reach. Place the bird feeder board out. And then roll the dice into the bird feeder. Shuffle the bonus cards into a deck and place them in the play area. These are the goal tiles. They're double-sided with different goals on each side. Take all of the goal tiles, mix them up, and randomly place one side face up on each of these spaces. Any extra goal tiles are returned to the box. Each player receives a player mat, 8 action cubes of a single color, 2 random bonus cards, 5 random bird cards, and 1 of each of the 5 different food tokens. When playing Duet, the players may keep their hand of cards private or public throughout the game. You now have 10 resources at your disposal, 5 food tokens and 5 bird cards. You now need to discard 5 of them and keep 5 in any combination. You'll probably want to keep food tokens that match the upper left corner food tokens shown on whichever bird cards you keep. So for instance, if I decide to keep these 2 birds, the rook and the rose-ringed parakeet, I would discard these 3. And then I would look at these and see, all right, well, the rose-ringed parakeet can eat either grain or berries, and so I definitely want to keep one of those for sure. And the rook can eat anything, so I could keep anything else. So maybe what I'll do is I'll keep a rat and a berry and a grain, and then discard the fish and the grub. So now I'll start with these 2 birds and these 3 foods. So now let's take a look at the 2 bonus cards I have. I'll have to choose one of them. One is food remaining in your supply at the end of the game, or fish and rat tokens cached on birds. You can see at the bottom it tells you what % of birds can cache food. So in this set, 13% of birds can cache food. This one doesn't give you any sort of percentage because this is completely up to you, the player, at the end of the game, how much food you have. So maybe I will choose Winter Feeder as the bonus card I'm starting with, and I will discard the other one. It should be noted that you are allowed to look at your bonus cards prior to selecting your birds and food, and so if you wanted to line up, and create a synergy, if there was a synergy that could be made between the bonus cards you had and the birds, that is absolutely a valid strategy. Now, it should be noted that these tokens are duet goal tiles only, and they're not to be used when you're playing with more than 2 players or not playing in duet mode. So the setup for duet mode goes exactly the way we've explained so far, with the exception that, as I showed earlier, you will be using these. And you'll place them out randomly without looking at them ahead of time onto these 4 spots. Additionally, however, each player has 15 of these duet tokens, and they will place 1 in each of the spaces on their player board. So it looks something like this. Each time you place a bird card into one of these spaces, you will then place the corresponding duet token onto one of the spaces on the duet board. Each time you place a bird card into one of these spaces, you will place the corresponding duet token onto one of the spaces on the duet map. We'll discuss that in more detail shortly. Once the players are set up, they need to randomly select a first player and give them the first player token. Wingspan takes place over 4 rounds. During each round, players take turns proceeding clockwise until each player has used all of their available action cubes. Obviously, in a 2-player game, clockwise and counterclockwise with the same thing. On your turn, you will take one of 4 actions. The player board actually shows you your actions. You have play a bird card here. You have gain food from the bird feeder, lay eggs on birds, and draw bird cards. To play a bird card, you'll take one of your action cubes and place it next to play a bird card over the column where the bird is going to be played. So in this case, if I was going to play the rose-ringed parakeet into the forest area, then I would place this here. Now, alternatively, if, let's say, this had previously been played, Coppersmith Barbet, that was already there, then I would place this cube here instead, because this is the forest space that I'm able to play the rose-ringed parakeet into. Now, when playing a bird into this first column, there is no cost associated with it. If you're going to play a bird into the second column, it will actually cost you 1 egg. And so you would have to have the egg. So again, let's say this bird was here and it had a couple of eggs on it already. Then, in order to play this rose-ringed parakeet into this forest space, I would have to discard one of these eggs and then also discard the necessary food. So in this case, it's either grain or berry. And so let's say I get rid of the grain, and now I'll be able to play the rose-ringed parakeet. As you can see, this column also costs 1 egg, and these 2 columns each cost 2 eggs. Once you have played the bird, you then slide your action cube all the way to the left. The other 3 major actions in the game, gain food, lay eggs, and draw bird cards, follow the same 3-step process. And we'll go into them in more detail in a second, but that 3-step process is choose the habitat on your player mat that you want to activate, so gain foods. Place your cube on the leftmost empty space, and then gain the benefit of that space. So in this case, you would gain a single food from the bird feeder. In this case, you would lay 2 eggs. In this case, you would draw a single bird card. Once you gain the benefit, you then slide your cube to the left. The reason why sliding the cube is important is once you have more birds in your habitat, many of them will have this brown power on them. And so, for instance, here, I would activate that space and slide the cube to the left, and now I would activate this brown power as well. You can see you have then activate any brown powers in this row as a reminder that after you gain food, you activate brown powers. After you lay eggs, you activate brown powers. After you draw bird cards, you activate brown powers. It should also be noted that each of these brown powers are optional. The player is not required to activate them. And as usual, when the cube reaches the far left, you will then leave it there, at which point your turn is over. The reason why it's important for your cubes to stay on the board is once all players have placed all of their cubes on the board, doing the various actions, the round will end. When the round ends, the players will follow the 6 round end steps that are outlined on this reference tile. First, if the player has any birds with round end powers, these will be resolved. The end of round goal for the current round will be scored. If this is the end of the final round, then game end powers on birds will be resolved. However, if not, then of course you will skip that step and instead go straight to remove all action cubes from your player mat. And remember, all action cubes will be on your player mat at this time. So you remove them all. Any birds still in the bird tray will be discarded, and 3 new birds will be drawn. The first player token will be passed to the next player in clockwise order. If you're playing in duet mode, then the first player token goes to the player who came in second on the end of round goal. If the player is tied, then the first player token goes to the player that did not have it in the previous round. So now let's discuss the 4 actions in detail. We already touched on playing a bird card, and we touched on the others a little bit as well, but we're going to go into detail for each of them. Before choosing to play a bird card from your hand, you need to consider its habitat and food, as well as egg cost. Each bird has a habitat and food requirement. So, for instance, the Eurasian eagle owl can live in the grasslands or the forest and requires 2 rodents. The egg cost, as we've mentioned, will be shown at the top of the column where the bird is going to be played. If you cannot afford to pay either the food cost or the egg cost, you cannot play the bird. If we chose to play the Eurasian eagle out, we would then choose which of its two possible habitats we would play it into. So perhaps in this case, we'll play it into the grasslands. Each habitat has a maximum of 5 possible birds that can live in it. To play a bird, you put the cube in the top of the column that it's going to be played into. As we've mentioned, this indicates the egg cost. For the first column, it's no egg cost. Birds must always be played in the leftmost open spot. We would then play the bird there, paying its food of 2 rodents, discarding it back to the supply. This bird shows 2 grain as well as a wild symbol, and it has these plus signs. So this means that the bird requires all the food here, and the third food can be anything. This bird, on the other hand, has no food cost. And remember, the slash symbol means or, so this bird costs either a grub or a seed. It should also be noted, and it's shown here, that any 2 food counts as any 1 other food. So, for instance, if I had 1 rodent for this bird, but I didn't have any other rodents, but I did instead have, for instance, maybe a fish and a grub, I could use this fish and the grub to count as the missing rodent that I don't have. Once you have played the bird onto the board, slide your action cube to the left. If the bird card has a white when played power, then as soon as the bird is played to the board, you may resolve that power. However, any other power, the brown, the yellow, the blue, any other power, there's also pink powers that we'll talk about, is not resolved when the bird is played. Only the white when played powers are resolved at that moment. However, that also means that these when played abilities are never used again throughout the game unless a power allows you to reactivate it. Next, let's discuss the gain food action. Food is primarily used to play bird cards. Your options for which food to gain are entirely based on what the die faces show in the bird feeder. When you choose the gain food action, you place your cube in the leftmost empty spot on the player board, which will then show you how many dice you get to select. So in this case, I can select 1 food, so perhaps I take the rodent. When you select a die, you remove it from the bird feeder and place it nearby on the table, and then gain the food matching that die. You will always gain 1 food token per die, even when you see this die face here. This die gives you the option of choosing either seed or grub, not both. Now, if the slot where I place my action cube shows this symbol, it means, in this case, I would be able to gain 1 food die from the bird feeder, and then I can discard 1 bird from my hand to gain another food die if I want, so perhaps this one. It should be noted this is entirely optional. As you can see, as you go farther up the track, it gets more and more powerful until finally, if the track were completely full, you would gain 3 food tokens and could optionally discard a card for a 4th. After you've gained your food, you then slide the cube to the left, activating any brown when activated powers. This, again, is optional. And you end your turn when the cube reaches the far left of the board. Now, let's discuss the bird feeder for a moment. The bird feeder holds the available food dice, as we've discussed. The dice will be removed throughout the game, and as they're removed, they are placed on the table, just like this. If the bird feeder is ever completely empty, like this, immediately roll all 5 dice. If there's ever a time where all of the dice in the bird feeder show the same face, like this, and this even includes when there is only 1 die in the bird feeder, because it clearly is showing the same face as itself, any player who is about to gain food from the bird feeder can decide to re-roll it first if they don't like what's available. Again, this only happens when all the dice show the same face. But if the player does choose to re-roll, they take all 5 dice and re-roll them. It should also be noted that there is no limit to how many food tokens a player can have. There is also no limit to the food tokens in the supply. In the unlikely event that any type of food token is unavailable in the supply, use some sort of temporary substitute. Now let's discuss the lay eggs action. When you choose to lay eggs, first place an action cube in the leftmost empty space as normal. Gain the number of egg tokens from the supply as indicated, and place it on a bird card that has space for it according to its egg limit. Each bird has an egg limit shown here. So the crested ibis has an egg limit of 2, as does the Eurasian eagle owl. Some birds will have less, such as the Indian vulture with just 1, and some, such as the ruddy shelduck, has more. You may lay the eggs in any combination. So for instance, perhaps 1 here and 1 here. Or if I wanted to, I could put both up here, as long as you don't exceed the egg limit. It's possible you will have the capacity to lay more eggs than you have space for. So for instance, if this were my situation and I chose the lay eggs action, I could place 1 egg on the crested ibis, but the other egg has nowhere to go and is wasted. If the slot where I place the egg shows this symbol here, then that means after I get my 2 eggs here, I can then discard any 1 food token to gain an additional egg. This, as usual, is optional. You can see that by the time you fill up the grasslands, the final action is to gain 4 eggs and optionally discard a food for a 5th. Then, just like before, you will slide down the row here, activating any when-activated powers until you finally end up here and conclude your turn. There is no limit to the eggs in the supply. In the unlikely event that you don't have any eggs left, use a suitable substitute. It should also be pointed out that this nest symbol has nothing to do with laying eggs and instead is more related to end of round scoring or end of game scoring. But just so you know, there are 5 different type of nests. You have platform, you have cavity, you have bowl, and you have ground nests. This star is considered wild, and for the purposes of goals or any other game effect, they can match any type of nest. Finally, let's discuss the draw bird cards option. When you choose to draw cards, you place your action cube in the leftmost empty space as normal, and then draw the number of cards shown, in this case, 1. The card drawn can come from either the 3 face-up bird cards from the tray or from the top of the deck at rep. There is no limit to how many cards you can have in your hand. If the spot where you place your action cube shows this power here, it means that you can discard 1 egg to gain 1 additional bird card optionally. By the time you fill up this row, you will have the power to gain 3 bird cards plus a 4th if you discard an egg. As usual, you then begin sliding your cube down the row, activating any brown when activated powers until you reach the leftmost area when your turn ends. As you draw cards from the tray into your hand, they are not immediately refilled. Instead, you continue drawing. So in this case, I have 2 left. I could draw from here or here. And once you are done with your turn, your cube has come all the way down here. At the end of your turn is when you refill the tray. If you ever run through this entire deck, reshuffle all discarded cards to form a new deck. Also, just as a reminder, at the end of the entire round of play, these cards will be discarded and 3 new ones will be drawn. Now that we've covered each of the actions in the game, let's talk specifically about duet-specific gameplay. Whenever you play a bird card into a space, you will then need to place the duet token from that spot into an unclaimed space on the duet map that matches the bird you played. What does it mean for a space to match the bird? Well, it means that the space must be in the region of the duet map that corresponds to the habitat where you played the bird. So this bird was played in the forest. So this green area is forest, this yellow area is grasslands, and the blue area is wetlands. So in this case, this duet token will have to go somewhere in the green space. The symbol on the space must correspond to the bird you played. So in this case, for instance, we have the cavity nest, so we could use this or this. To use a food space, you have to have spent that food. In this case, we would have spent both a grub and a berry, so any of the grub or berry spaces are available to us. If you use the 2-for-1 rule, so for instance, if I had converted 2 seeds into a berry, I would still treat it as I had spent that berry, not the seeds. And you can see you also have a less than 50 centimeters and greater than 50 centimeters, which refers to the wingspan of the bird. This bird has 23 centimeters, so we could use this less than 50. Keep in mind, you can place these tokens anytime you play a bird to the player mat. The play bird action, of course, is the main way birds will get played out here, but you're able to use these tokens even if a bird gets played to an area in some other way. It should be noted that these tokens are simply here as a reminder to play them. And so if a bird has a power that moves them from one habitat to another, that will not cause the token to be played. Instead, you would just move the token that is now being taken up into the new space. So for instance, the spotted dove has a power that lets it move under certain circumstances. And so if it moved down here, you would just move this token up here to show that it still needs to be played. There are also some birds in other expansions that I do not have that allow you to play a bird on top of another bird. This counts as playing a bird and allows you to place a duet token. This also means that it is technically possible for you to play more than 15 birds in a game using all of your duet tokens and needing another one. The duet tokens are not limited by the supply, and you are then able to place a suitable substitute as your duet token. Only one player can be in each space, so the other player will no longer be able to use this space or this space. If you cannot place a duet token or simply do not wish to, you may place the duet token in the reset space in the lower left of the board. On a later turn, at any time on your turn, you may remove that duet token to reset the bird tray or the bird feeder. Certain spaces on the map have a bonus associated with them. If you use a space with the egg, bird card, or food die bonus, you gain the bonus shown. So let's go a little bit more into the end of round in duet mode. At the end of the round, players will each place a player cube to score, just as in the base game. However, points are only awarded to the player who contributes the most. You can see 2 points, or 0, 3, 0, 4, 0, and 5, 0. Black player scored the most, they would put it there, and the white player would get 0. Keep in mind, though, the player who comes in second gains the first player token for the next round. In the case of a tie, both players get the points, and the first player token gets passed to the player who did not have it. There's additional end-of-game scoring as well using duet mode. The map here is going to obviously collect a bunch of your duet tokens throughout the game, and at the end of the game, you find your largest contiguous group of duet tokens on the map. So for instance, the black player has 3 contiguous here and 2 contiguous here, so this is their largest group, whereas the white player has 4 contiguous here. The players score 1 point for each token in that contiguous group, so the black player gets 3, the white player gets 4 points. Spaces are considered contiguous as long as they have a line connecting them on the duet map. The rest of the end of game scoring proceeds as normal. First, score your bird cards. Every bird card has this value here. These are the points that bird is worth at the end of the game. Players only get points for birds face up on their player mat, not birds in their hand. Players then check their bonus cards for any points. Players count out their points for their end of round goals based off of the scoring here. If they're using the Oceania expansion, they will of course get points for nectar. Players get 1 point for every egg currently on a bird card, 1 point for every food cached on one of their bird cards, 1 point for every bird card tucked behind one of their bird cards. At that point, the player who has the most points wins. If there is a tie, the player with the most unused food tokens wins, and if there is still a tie, it is a shared victory. And that is how you play the Duet Mode with the Wingspan Asia expansion. It should be noted that Wingspan Asia comes with Automa rules for Asia specifically, as well as an appendix with very detailed accounting for all the various bonus cards, bird powers. Also, you may combine the bird cards from Wingspan Asia and the bonus cards with the Wingspan core game and other expansions. Thank you so much for watching. I know channel production has been slow, but we are still producing stuff. Be sure to come back. I am going to be filming an unboxing of Trudvang Legends right after this video. And then I'll also begin working on the next part of my Aeon Trespass Odyssey How to Play series, finally. Be sure to click like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, click that bell so you get notifications, and until next time, if you're bored online, board offline.